That is interesting because there's a lot of mixed emotions about the APR. They say it's kind of flawed, especially with like the ability for a student to be like, well, I'm just going to go to the NBA. You know, I'm going to leave early or I'm going to transfer. So with the mixed feelings, do you believe that there is possibly a better system than the APR, or is there something crucial that they're not?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to philosophical difference. I mean, the old system, if a basketball program had a 0% graduation rate and they had 4 student athletes come in and they didn't graduate and they all went pro and were multimillionaires, you can argue those individuals were successful. If a program has a 0% graduation rate, none went pro, none of them finished their degree, and they're not working and not being productive, that's obviously a bad sign. I was comfortable in the old system with us acknowledging that you could leave to go professional, and if you had a 25% graduation rate, we would be okay with that, as long as you were meeting the eligibility rules. The problem in my mind with some of this data is, I've often used the analogy like a grade in a course. If you had 4 exams in a course at Michigan State, say, and you earned a 70% on all 4 exams, you would have a 70 in the course. Well, if the instructor gave you points for attendance, points for extra credit, you actually can inflate your grade to maybe an 80. But the reality is you still only know 70% of the material. And so what's happening with some of these metrics is it's actually manufactured, where you're actually feeling better about the data. I did get a 3-point in a class because of all the extra credit, but the reality is I only know 70% of the work. And so it's really depending on how you look at it. I think it's been very successful for our profession having these metrics because it's added a positive discussion to student athlete, the term student athlete, and what that really means. So from that perspective, I think it's been great for the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So which sport do you think is going to be affected the most overall at Michigan State specifically?
For APR?
Yeah.
Well, in general, Michigan State, we're actually very healthy in APR. Sports that actually have lower APRs are teams with smaller squad size. Because the smaller team that you have, the easier it is to move that number up or down depending on what their activity is in the classroom or they transferred or not. Football actually, to be really bad in a football APR score, you have to have a lot of movement, a lot of turnover, and a lot of student athletes doing poor in your program, which we have neither of those things happening at Michigan State. But for example, if one would look at our APR score right now, they'd see men's golf as a low number, close to around football, and they say, well, how could that be? And the reality is it's over a 3.0 team GPA. They had some transfers out of students that were here for a year or two, and because the team's so small, it affects your number greatly when someone leaves. So the smaller squad size teams are much more in jeopardy than the larger ones. At Michigan State, we're tracking golf primarily because we had a coaching transition, and with that you tend to see some movement of student athletes out of a program. But right now we feel very comfortable with where we're at and how we're tracking in that area.
That's good. Go State.
You mentioned the men's golf score. On average, how are Michigan State's APR scores like as a whole school?
Yeah, our average score, the data is a year delayed, and so the information that we have submitted to NCAA in October is actually for last year, the 10-11 academic year, and it's just the way it's processed through the NCAA system. Our APR score for our institution is a 980. Which is very high. Our women's teams are almost perfect score. Our men's basketball team, very high. Actually, we were in some rankings. If you look at public institutions, we were 3rd in the country in men's basketball and APR with a perfect 1,000. So, those are good things, and we like to celebrate them. But again, if you go back to my comments on what that number really means, it's a different discussion. So while this has become now the standard for us to evaluate academic success for college athletes, I think we have to be careful, and then NCAA has to be careful about how we sell that and how we actually talk about it.
Okay. Yeah. So do you think this change would truly benefit the academic, success of the athlete, or do you think it maybe possibly would put more pressure, or do you think they know?
I tell you what it's done at the mid-major level, it's added more resources. This legislation absolutely crushed HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and crushed low-resource institutions. Institutions that don't have football, maybe Division I basketball, and they only had academic support of maybe one person and a couple of graduate assistants. At Michigan State, we're in the top half of the conference of 13 full-time professionals that work with our athletes. So what APR has done is brought attention to the schools who didn't have had maybe high ratios of academic advisors to student athletes. So I think from that perspective, it's been wonderful. I've been often asked what changes we made even in '03 with APR coming on board, and all we did was just increase our attention to how we track that. We didn't add more computers, we didn't add more staff. Our staff is 3 people lower than it was in 2002. So at the larger schools, it wasn't about resources, it was about paying attention to student athletes in the last part of their career. We're trying to push them to graduate sooner. We're trying to push them to keep their GPA maybe above a 2.0 instead of dropping below a 2.0. So philosophically, we may have changed the way we were doing things from a conversation standpoint and graduation plan, but organizationally and resource-wise, we didn't change a thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all the insight and everything. Thanks for being here today. That's all the time we have. So we'll see. For Spartan Online News, I'm Salafata, J-Mo Williams. See you next time.
Thank you.